Hidden hunger. At exactly 6:45 in the morning, Jasmine Bennett carefully spread peanut butter and jelly across slices of wheat bread, assembling them into perfectly neat sandwiches. She did this ritual every morning, quietly humming as her daughter, Alexis, prepared for another day at Oak Ridge Elementary. Jasmine believed deeply in giving her daughter the best possible start, no matter how tough life got. Though their apartment was small and the fridge rarely full, Jasmine made sure Alexis had nutritious, homemade lunches every day. Alexis stepped into the kitchen, backpack already zipped, her curly black hair brushed into neat twin ponytails. Jasmine smiled, holding out the lunchbox. "Your favorite today, sweetheart." "Thank you, Mama." Alexis beamed, planting a quick kiss on her mother's cheek. Jasmine felt a soft squeeze in her chest, a warm pride swelling inside her. Alexis had always been a happy, bubbly girl despite the tough times they had faced. Her resilience made Jasmine determined to shield her from harm at all costs. Alexis hurried to the bus stop, clutching her lunchbox as if it were treasure. Jasmine watched her disappear down the road and turned back toward their small home, a deep sigh escaping her. Each day felt like a battle to stay ahead, but seeing Alexis smile gave her strength. Jasmine grabbed her bag, heading to the diner where she worked long shifts serving customers who rarely said thanks. But the job kept food on the table, so Jasmine endured. It wasn't until later, when Alexis walked into her classroom and placed her lunchbox carefully in her desk, that trouble began to quietly brew. Alexis's teacher, Mrs. Vanessa Crenshaw, watched carefully as her students settled in for their lessons. Mrs. Crenshaw was respected by most parents and feared by students, a no-nonsense woman in her mid-40s, tall and imposing, with cold gray eyes that rarely softened. She strode down the aisles, pausing at Alexis's desk. Alexis immediately straightened, her small fingers twisting anxiously together. Mrs. Crenshaw eyed the bright, colorful lunchbox suspiciously. "What did your mother send today, Alexis?" she asked sharply, her voice barely disguising irritation. Alexis swallowed nervously. "It's peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, carrot sticks, and an apple." Mrs. Crenshaw opened the lunchbox herself, glaring at its contents. She scoffed. "Not exactly nutritious, is it?" Alexis blinked, confused. "But Mama says it's healthy. She always checks to." "Your mother isn't a nutritionist, Alexis. This," Mrs. Crenshaw snapped the lunchbox shut, "is inappropriate for school." A few nearby classmates glanced over, whispering quietly to each other. Alexis felt her cheeks burn, embarrassment, and confusion gripping her chest. She had no idea why her lunch suddenly wasn't acceptable. It looked exactly like everyone else's lunch, yet only hers seemed to cause a problem. For the rest of the morning, Alexis struggled to concentrate. At lunchtime, Mrs. Crenshaw marched to Alexis's desk again. "Since your mother can't seem to follow school guidelines, I'll have to confiscate this lunch," she announced, picking it up from the desk without hesitation. Alexis's mouth dropped open, stunned. "But Mrs. Crenshaw," she stammered, "Mama made it just for me." "She didn't." Mrs. Crenshaw's sharp eyes narrowed. "Are you questioning your teacher, Alexis?" Alexis swallowed hard, shrinking down into her seat. "No, ma'am," she whispered. "Good," Mrs. Crenshaw said, a thin, unpleasant smile stretching her lips. She marched away, taking Alexis's carefully prepared meal with her. From that day forward, Alexis's lunches disappeared regularly. Every morning, Jasmine diligently prepared a balanced lunch, never suspecting the torment Alexis endured silently. Each afternoon, Alexis came home hungry and exhausted, avoiding eye contact when Jasmine asked how school was. She gave quick, vague answers, quietly rummaging through the pantry, searching for snacks or leftovers to satisfy her empty stomach. Her usually bright energy began to fade, replaced by an anxious melancholy Jasmine couldn't ignore. On one particular Wednesday afternoon, Jasmine stood near the kitchen window, her heart sinking, as she watched Alexis trudge slowly toward their front door. Alexis entered, her eyes downcast, and set her lunchbox down by the entrance. Jasmine frowned, noticing the distinct sag in Alexis's shoulders. "You okay, honey?" Jasmine gently asked. Alexis nodded weakly, opening the fridge door. Jasmine followed her daughter's gaze, noticing Alexis staring at a bowl of leftover pasta from the night before. Alexis took the bowl out, clutching it, as if she hadn't eaten in days. "Didn't you have lunch at school, sweetheart?" Jasmine asked, attempting to hide the growing worry in her voice. Alexis hesitated, eyes fixed on the bowl. I wasn't really hungry then," she whispered. Jasmine moved closer, carefully studying her daughter's expression. Alexis had always been honest, but Jasmine sensed something deeper troubling her child. "You've been skipping lunch a lot lately," Jasmine pointed out softly, trying not to alarm her daughter further. "If there's something happening at school, you can talk to me. You know that, right?" Alexis' lip trembled slightly, but she quickly composed herself. "It's nothing, Mama. Really." Her words sounded hollow. Jasmine's heart tightened with anxiety. She knew better, but decided not to press Alexis at that moment, choosing instead to watch and observe. Days turned into weeks, and Alexis continued arriving home starving. Jasmine couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her gut. She decided to take action. That next Monday morning, after packing Alexis's lunch, Jasmine quietly followed the school bus in her car, determined to observe Alexis from afar. Once the children spilled onto the playground for recess, Jasmine's gaze locked on Alexis, who stood isolated near the swings. Alexis's teacher approached, sharply beckoning the girl over. Jasmine's stomach knotted, watching as Mrs. Crenshaw briskly snatched Alexis's lunchbox away again. Jasmine's eyes widened in disbelief as the teacher casually opened the lunchbox and began eating Alexis's sandwich right in front of her daughter, displaying a callous disregard for Alexis's sadness. Jasmine's hands trembled with anger. What kind of teacher would deliberately eat her student's lunch, humiliating her publicly? Jasmine felt fury burn through her veins. She would not stand by and allow her daughter to suffer silently. This was no misunderstanding. This was cruelty, plain and simple. That evening, Jasmine carefully prepared Alexis's lunch, deliberately adding a hidden note beneath the sandwich, a small folded slip reading, "Smile, Alexis, you're loved more than you know." But Jasmine also slipped something else discreetly into the side pocket of the lunchbox, a small audio recorder. Jasmine had a plan, and this time she would have undeniable proof of Mrs. Crenshaw's mistreatment. The next morning, Jasmine held Alexis a moment longer than usual before the girl boarded her bus. "If something's bothering you at school today, don't worry, honey," she reassured. "Mama is going to make things right." Alexis hugged her tightly, holding Jasmine's gaze. "I trust you, Mama," she whispered. Watching her daughter climb onto the bus, Jasmine silently vowed to protect Alexis from anyone daring to hurt her, no matter the cost. At that moment, she knew her role was far bigger than preparing lunches or earning paychecks. Jasmine was determined to fight for her daughter's dignity, to stand firmly against the injustice Alexis endured daily. That afternoon, Jasmine waited anxiously until Alexis returned home. Without a word, Alexis handed over her lunchbox. Jasmine quickly removed the audio recorder, pressing play. Her stomach churned as she heard Mrs. Crenshaw's cold voice clearly stating, "You know better than to bring these lunches. Your mother obviously doesn't understand simple school rules, Alexis. I'm taking this for your own good." Then, a few moments later, came the sound of Mrs. Crenshaw quietly laughing to herself, murmuring dismissively, "At least she has good taste in sandwiches." Jasmine felt anger burn hot tears behind her eyes. Alexis looked up at her, uncertainty and fear flickering across her small face. Jasmine knelt down, pulling her child close. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Mama is going to fix this." "What if it gets worse?" Alexis murmured, her voice shaking. Jasmine's jaw tightened, determined. "Baby, trust me. Sometimes standing up is scary, but we have to face it head on. You deserve to be treated with respect. I promise you, this won't happen again." Alexis held tight, finding comfort in Jasmine's strength. That night, Jasmine barely slept, lying awake as she planned her next move carefully. Tomorrow, she vowed silently, Mrs. Crenshaw would finally face justice. Jasmine knew she would stop at nothing to ensure her daughter, and any other child Mrs. Crenshaw had victimized, would never have to suffer again. And little did Jasmine know, this confrontation would uncover something far deeper, far darker, hidden within Oak Ridge Elementary's walls. What she discovered next would challenge her resolve, but Jasmine knew she had to expose the disturbing truth, for Alexis, for justice, and for every silent voice too afraid to speak. Breaking silence. The following morning came swiftly, yet Jasmine barely slept. Her mind spun relentlessly, replaying the cruel laughter of Mrs. Crenshaw, echoing from the recording she'd hidden inside Alexis's lunchbox. Jasmine had always admired teachers, understanding their role in shaping children's lives. But Mrs. Crenshaw's actions shattered that trust, igniting within Jasmine a fierce resolve to fight for justice, not just for Alexis, but for every child affected by the silent cruelty within Oak Ridge Elementary. After a hurried breakfast, Jasmine stood in her small kitchen, carefully packing Alexis' lunch once more. This time, she meticulously placed a handwritten note in clear view beneath the sandwich. The note read simply, "Mrs. Crenshaw, I know exactly what you've been doing." Alexis watched quietly, chewing nervously on her lip. "Are you sure this will work, Mama?" she asked softly, her voice uncertain. Jasmine knelt, gently cupping her daughter's face in her hands. "Sweetheart, sometimes you have to face a bully head-on. It's scary, I know. But remember, we're stronger together." Alexis hugged her tightly. "I believe you." Watching Alexis board the bus, Jasmine took a deep breath, steeling herself. She quickly grabbed her keys, determined to confront the situation directly. Her heart pounded as she drove toward Oak Ridge Elementary, her mind racing through possible scenarios. She had always avoided confrontation, yet now it was her duty to protect her daughter. This wasn't just about a sandwich. It was about dignity and fairness, principles she wouldn't compromise. As Jasmine arrived at Oak Ridge Elementary, she paused at the entrance, the building looming larger than it ever had before. With determination, she pushed through the heavy doors, walking briskly to the main office. Inside, the receptionist, Mrs. Tilley, glanced up with surprise, recognizing Jasmine immediately. "Ms. Bennett, is everything okay? Is Alexis all right?" Jasmine hesitated briefly before stepping forward, her voice firm yet calm. "I need to speak with Principal Edwards right now, please." Mrs. Tilley seemed concerned, but she quickly nodded. "Of course. One moment." Minutes felt like hours. Jasmine's eyes drifted toward the office walls, covered in colorful drawings and inspirational posters praising kindness, honesty, and respect, the very values being quietly destroyed in Mrs. Crenshaw's classroom. The irony stung Jasmine deeply. Suddenly, Principal Edwards emerged, a middle-aged man known for his mild temperament and approachable personality. Today, however, his face carried an edge of curiosity and slight worry. "Ms. Bennett," he greeted gently, "please, come into my office." Inside, Jasmine sat carefully in front of his large wooden desk. Principal Edwards folded his hands, leaning forward slightly. "What can I do for you? Has something happened with Alexis?" Jasmine steadied herself, feeling the weight of what she was about to reveal. "Principal Edwards, are you aware that Mrs. Crenshaw has been taking my daughter's lunch every day, publicly humiliating her, and then eating it herself?" Principal Edwards's brow furrowed deeply, confusion evident. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" Without hesitation, Jasmine placed the small audio recorder gently on his desk and pressed play. The office filled with Mrs. Crenshaw's harsh voice, arrogant laughter, and Alexis' frightened silence. Principal Edwards's eyes widened in disbelief, his expression shifting from shock to anger. "Has Alexis mentioned this before?" he asked quietly after the recording stopped, clearly disturbed. Jasmine took a deep breath. No, she's been too afraid. But I've seen it happen myself. I followed Alexis to school and witnessed Mrs. Crenshaw taking her lunch. At first, I thought maybe there was a misunderstanding. But it's happening every single day. Alexis comes home hungry and upset. Principal Edwards exhaled slowly, clearly disturbed. This is extremely troubling. Mrs. Crenshaw has taught here for many years, but we've never had an accusation like this before. Jasmine leaned forward, determined. Principal Edwards, with all due respect, this isn't just an accusation. You heard it yourself. My daughter deserves better than to be treated like this by someone she's supposed to trust. He nodded solemnly, visibly shaken. You're absolutely right. We need to investigate immediately. I'll personally handle this. Trust me, Ms. Bennett, your concerns will be addressed seriously and swiftly. Jasmine rose, relief slightly easing her tension. Thank you. I trust you'll do the right thing. However, as she exited the office, an unsettling feeling lingered. Jasmine couldn't shake the suspicion that there was more beneath the surface. How had no one noticed this behavior? Could Alexis truly be the only victim? Outside, Jasmine noticed Alexis's classmates gathering for recess. Among them, she saw Alexis standing quietly near the fence, away from other children, clutching her empty lunchbox. Jasmine's heart ached at the sight. She quickly approached her daughter, calling gently, "Alexis, sweetheart." Alexis turned, eyes wide with surprise. "Mama, what are you doing here?" "I came to make sure everything's okay," Jasmine explained, holding Alexis's hand. "Principal Edwards promised to handle everything. You won't have to worry about Mrs. Crenshaw anymore." Alexis's eyes filled with sudden hope, but just as quickly clouded with uncertainty. "What if she lies, Mama?" Jasmine tightened her grip reassuringly. "That's why we have proof, honey. Trust me, the truth will always find a way out." Just then, Mrs. Crenshaw appeared, marching swiftly toward them. Her cold eyes narrowed suspiciously. Jasmine straightened protectively as the woman approached, glaring down at Alexis first, then shifting sharply to Jasmine. "Ms. Bennett," Mrs. Crenshaw snapped curtly, "parents aren't allowed to approach children during school hours without checking in." Jasmine's resolve solidified. "I already spoke with Principal Edwards, Mrs. Crenshaw. He's aware of everything you've been doing to Alexis." Mrs. Crenshaw's expression flickered briefly with surprise, quickly replaced by defensive anger. "Whatever accusations you've made are baseless. Alexis frequently brings unsuitable lunches. It's my responsibility to eat them yourself." Jasmine interrupted fiercely, voice trembling with emotion. "To mock my daughter publicly? How does that teach her anything other than humiliation?" Mrs. Crenshaw's jaw tightened, her posture stiffening. "I refuse to discuss this further with you. Any concerns should be addressed through official channels." As Mrs. Crenshaw walked away, Jasmine's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Her cold denial and defensiveness hinted at something deeper beneath the surface. Jasmine knew she couldn't stop now. If Mrs. Crenshaw was capable of treating Alexis so cruelly, what else had she done? That night, Jasmine took to social media, carefully describing her experience without naming Alexis, highlighting the disturbing trend of silent bullying happening right beneath parents' noses. Within hours, Jasmine's inbox flooded with messages. Other parents began sharing similar concerns. Stories emerged about students' lunches disappearing, mysterious punishments, and an atmosphere of quiet fear lingering around Mrs. Crenshaw's class. The following day, Jasmine received a call from Principal Edwards. "Ms. Bennett," he spoke gravely, "we've uncovered troubling patterns concerning Mrs. Crenshaw's behavior toward several students. We've immediately placed her on administrative leave pending a formal investigation." Jasmine felt relief mixed with sadness. "Thank you," she whispered quietly, feeling the weight lifting slightly from her shoulders. Yet, despite the initial victory, Jasmine understood their battle had only just begun. Alexis's voice had broken a hidden silence that had plagued Oak Ridge Elementary for far too long. Jasmine now realized the importance of continuing to speak out, empowering not only Alexis but other children who feared the consequences of confronting authority figures. Later that evening, Jasmine tucked Alexis into bed, gently brushing hair from her daughter's face. Alexis gazed up, sleepy yet peaceful. "Did we really win, Mama?" Alexis murmured softly. Jasmine smiled warmly, leaning in close. "We've taken the first step, baby. Sometimes doing the right thing is scary, but it's always worth it." Alexis smiled softly, eyes fluttering closed. "I'm glad you spoke up, Mama. Maybe now other kids won't feel scared." As Jasmine quietly closed Alexis's door, determination filled her heart anew. Yes, they had broken silence. But now it was time to fully dismantle it, revealing every hidden injustice lurking in Oak Ridge Elementary's halls. Because Jasmine knew clearly, Alexis' bravery was just the beginning. Secrets revealed. Jasmine's decision to expose Mrs. Crenshaw's abusive actions ignited a firestorm in the Oak Ridge community. The school's quiet halls buzzed with whispers, tense conversations, and shocked disbelief. Parents, students, and faculty found themselves forced to confront uncomfortable truths hidden beneath the surface of their trusted institution. While Alexis now felt safer with Mrs. Crenshaw on administrative leave, Jasmine remained restless, sensing deeper secrets buried within Oak Ridge Elementary's walls. Driven by the desire for justice, Jasmine became the voice that emboldened others to speak. Her inbox filled daily with stories from families who'd quietly endured similar experiences. One evening, Jasmine sat alone at her kitchen table, poring over countless emails from parents sharing their frustrations. Each story tugged at her heart, deepening her resolve. But among them was an anonymous email simply titled, "You need to see this." Attached was a scanned document, a confidential report that made Jasmine's pulse quicken. The report detailed multiple prior complaints filed against Mrs. Crenshaw, complaints that had been quietly buried or dismissed without thorough investigation. Jasmine felt anger rise in her throat. This wasn't just one rogue teacher. It was evidence of systemic neglect, an administration willing to silence voices to protect reputations. Shaken, Jasmine immediately forwarded the file to Principal Edwards, demanding answers. Within minutes, her phone rang. "Ms. Bennett," Principal Edwards's voice was heavy, subdued. "I'm deeply sorry you had to discover this on your own. I promise you, I had no idea these files existed. They were kept intentionally hidden." "By whom?" Jasmine pressed, gripping her phone tightly. There was a tense silence on the other end. Finally, he spoke slowly. "The district superintendent's office." Jasmine felt her chest tighten. This scandal ran deeper than she'd ever imagined. "We need transparency," she insisted firmly. "Every parent deserves to know the truth." "I agree," Edwards said quietly. "I assure you, we'll investigate fully. But the superintendent's office carries enormous influence. We must tread carefully." After ending the call, Jasmine stared blankly into the darkness. She hadn't intended to start a war, yet she couldn't retreat now. Her daughter deserved better. Every child deserved better. The following day, Jasmine stood anxiously at the entrance to the Oak Ridge Elementary auditorium, invited to speak at an emergency parent-teacher meeting. Her heart thumped loudly as she entered, noticing hundreds of parents packed tightly into rows, their expressions tense and worried. As Principal Edwards introduced her, Jasmine stepped forward, gripping the microphone. She saw Alexis sitting proudly beside other children, whose parents came to show support. Jasmine took a deep breath, determined to speak the truth clearly, despite the risk. "My name is Jasmine Bennett, mother of Alexis Bennett. I'm here because my daughter endured humiliation and mistreatment from a teacher entrusted to protect her." Her voice steadied as she continued. "But the deeper issue isn't just one teacher. It's about a system designed to silence our children." Murmurs swept the auditorium. Jasmine pressed on boldly. "I received proof that Oak Ridge Elementary, and even higher-ups within the school district, knew about multiple complaints against this teacher and chose to ignore them. Our children's dignity was less important to them than preserving their reputation. Gasps and angry voices erupted, parents exchanging shocked glances. Jasmine lifted the confidential report for everyone to see. This report documents multiple ignored cases. Families were silenced. Complaints disappeared. That stops today. Principal Edwards stepped forward, addressing the now heated crowd. I assure everyone here, Oak Ridge Elementary will fully cooperate with investigations. No more secrets, no more hiding. An elderly woman stood suddenly from the crowd, raising her hand urgently. My granddaughter's lunches also disappeared regularly, but no one believed us. We were told she was just forgetful or exaggerating. Another father, voice shaking, called out, My son became withdrawn and afraid, refusing to tell us why. Now I see clearly he was afraid no one would believe him. One by one, parents bravely stood, sharing similar experiences, hidden pain finally spilling into the open. Jasmine felt hope rise alongside heartbreak. These stories validated Alexis's struggle, revealing the scale of silence enforced by fear and negligence. The meeting concluded with unanimous support for a thorough, independent investigation. Local media quickly caught wind, and Jasmine's story spread rapidly, creating pressure impossible for the superintendent's office to ignore. Yet, Jasmine knew their struggle wasn't over. Not yet. Late that evening, Jasmine received a knock on her door. She opened it cautiously, surprised to see Principal Edwards standing anxiously on her doorstep. Ms. Bennett, may I come in? He asked quietly. She nodded, leading him to her small kitchen table. Edwards seemed shaken, visibly troubled. I came here to warn you personally. Your actions have exposed something far more serious than I ever realized. What do you mean? Jasmine asked warily. Edwards's expression darkened. The superintendent's office contacted me directly. They're furious, demanding we stop speaking to the media and end this investigation immediately. Jasmine felt a chill. And what did you tell them? He straightened his shoulders. I refused. They threatened my job. I came here because I believe they're going to pressure you next. Please be careful. Jasmine felt fear clench her stomach. Yet beneath the fear lay fierce determination. I can't back down now. Not after everything we've uncovered. Edwards gave her a supportive look. You're incredibly brave, Ms. Bennett. Know this, you aren't alone. More parents support you than ever before. After Edwards left, Jasmine sat quietly, thoughts racing. Alexis's voice had sparked a powerful movement, but confronting the powerful superintendent meant danger she'd never anticipated. Still, she had no intention of retreating. Days passed tensely as the investigation intensified. Media coverage put immense pressure on district officials. Finally, news broke. The district superintendent had abruptly resigned amid the growing scandal, citing personal reasons. But Jasmine knew the real reason. Truth had finally overpowered silence. Alexis, meanwhile, began returning to school with a renewed sense of security. Teachers rallied around her and other children, publicly committing to create a culture of openness and trust. Alexis found herself surrounded by classmates once too afraid to speak, now proudly raising their voices against injustice. One afternoon, Jasmine received another unexpected visitor. Mrs. Crenshaw herself, standing uncomfortably at the doorstep, eyes downcast and uncertain. What are you doing here? Jasmine asked stiffly. Mrs. Crenshaw swallowed hard. I'm not here to defend myself, she said quietly. What I did was wrong. I let power and bitterness corrupt my judgment. I was encouraged by superiors who told me strict discipline and fear maintained order. Jasmine studied her carefully, realizing the depth of damage caused by a culture built on silence and control. You hurt children. You hurt my daughter, Jasmine said coldly. Nothing justifies that. I know, Mrs. Crenshaw admitted softly. I'll never teach again. But before I leave, you deserve to know the truth. This goes beyond me. The superintendent knew everything. Teachers were pressured to enforce harsh discipline, to silence complaints. It wasn't just about lunches, it was about control. Jasmine saw genuine remorse flicker in the woman's eyes. "Why tell me this now?" "Because someone has to end it," Mrs. Crenshaw said. "I lost myself. But maybe you can stop others from doing the same." As she walked away, Jasmine realized the power Alexis had unleashed, a wave strong enough to topple corruption hidden behind closed doors. They had begun this journey with a stolen lunch, but now stood at the heart of a fight to protect every child's dignity and voice. That night, Jasmine held Alexis close, grateful for her daughter's courage. Alexis smiled softly up at her mother. "Mama, did we really change things forever?" Jasmine squeezed her tightly, tears in her eyes. "Yes, baby, your bravery changed everything." Yet deep down, Jasmine knew one final challenge awaited, facing those responsible directly, ensuring lasting change. She would soon discover that confronting the truth wasn't just difficult, it was dangerous. But Jasmine Bennett was ready, courage to stand. The atmosphere around Oak Ridge Elementary transformed completely following the superintendent's abrupt resignation. Silence gave way to voices once muted, empowered by Jasmine Bennett's determination and Alexis's quiet courage. Yet Jasmine knew the most significant test lay ahead, ensuring lasting change and confronting the root cause of the toxic culture she'd exposed. As days passed, Jasmine was flooded with support from the community. Parents, once too frightened to speak, now openly challenged authority and demanded accountability. Oak Ridge Elementary was finally healing, yet Jasmine felt a lingering unease. She knew superficial changes were easy, but systemic reform required courage, transparency, and relentless commitment. One evening, Jasmine received a surprise invitation. The newly appointed district superintendent, Dr. Eleanor Simmons, a respected educator known for her transparency and honesty, requested a private meeting. Intrigued yet wary, Jasmine agreed, wondering if Dr. Simmons truly sought genuine change, or if this was simply damage control. At precisely 7 p.m., Jasmine arrived at the district office, feeling both anxiety and determination pulsing through her veins. Inside, Dr. Simmons warmly greeted her, offering a sincere handshake and leading Jasmine into her office. Simmons was a distinguished woman with silver-streaked hair, a calm presence, and wise eyes filled with sincerity. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Bennett," Dr. Simmons began earnestly. "I've followed your story closely. First, let me personally apologize on behalf of this district for everything Alexis endured." Jasmine nodded cautiously. "I appreciate that, but apologies aren't enough. We need meaningful action. Assurances this will never happen again." Dr. Simmons met Jasmine's gaze directly. "Absolutely. I invited you here tonight because real change requires courageous leadership. I'm aware of how deeply rooted this culture of silence and fear became. Your actions have exposed the very core of the problem. But now we need a clear plan to prevent history from repeating itself." Jasmine felt hope rise, cautiously tempered by experience. "What exactly do you propose?" Dr. Simmons smiled slightly, her voice filled with resolve. "First, I'm establishing an independent oversight committee of parents, teachers, and students, a body ensuring transparency, safe reporting of concerns, and direct accountability to the community." Jasmine listened intently, nodding. "That's a good first step. But I'd also like you to consider leading it," Dr. Simmons added gently. "Your courage and integrity have inspired our entire community. We need someone parents and students trust implicitly to ensure their voices are always heard." Jasmine hesitated, overwhelmed by the enormity of the offer. Leadership had never been her goal. Her fight had simply been about protecting Alexis. But Jasmine knew the power of what she'd started. She owed it to Alexis, and every other child, to see it through. After a thoughtful pause, Jasmine finally spoke, her voice resolute. "I accept. If we truly want change, I have to be willing to help lead it." Relief and gratitude spread across Dr. Simmons's face. "Thank you, Ms. Bennett. Together, I believe we can restore trust and dignity at Oak Ridge." News of Jasmine's new role quickly spread. Alexis felt immense pride watching her mother's courage celebrated openly, seeing her classmates, teachers, and community members rallying behind Jasmine's leadership. But Jasmine's true test came just days later at a widely publicized school board meeting. Hundreds packed the auditorium: parents, students, teachers, and even local media, waiting anxiously to see how Oak Ridge would move forward. As Jasmine stepped confidently to the podium, the crowd fell silent, all eyes fixed on the woman whose determination had sparked a revolution. "Thank you for being here tonight," Jasmine began firmly, her voice steady despite nerves. "This journey began because my daughter suffered silently, afraid to speak against injustice. But Alexis wasn't alone. Countless students faced similar abuse, silenced by fear. Today, that silence ends permanently." Applause erupted across the auditorium. Jasmine continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "As your advocate, I promise that no child will ever again fear retaliation for speaking truth. No parent will ever feel helpless to protect their child. Accountability will no longer be optional. It will be our foundation." The crowd stood, clapping vigorously. Jasmine felt emotion swell within her, recognizing how profoundly Alexis' bravery had changed their lives and their community forever. Yet, amid celebration, Jasmine spotted a familiar figure standing near the exit, Mrs. Crenshaw, who had quietly attended, her face filled with remorse. As the meeting concluded, Mrs. Crenshaw cautiously approached Jasmine. "I needed to be here tonight, Miss Bennett," she said quietly, "to truly see what courage looks like." Jasmine regarded her steadily. "Real courage starts with accountability." "I understand," Mrs. Crenshaw admitted sincerely. "I came here to face what I've done, to learn from it. You and Alexis showed me what strength really means." Jasmine paused thoughtfully, recognizing a profound change within the woman who'd once tormented her daughter. "Change takes humility and commitment," Jasmine said gently. "I hope you continue that journey." "I will," Mrs. Crenshaw promised, her voice heavy with sincerity. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Weeks turned to months, and Oak Ridge began to heal genuinely. The Oversight Committee flourished under Jasmine's leadership, ensuring transparency, safety, and dignity became lasting priorities. Alexis blossomed once again, confident and proud of the change she inspired. One evening, Jasmine sat quietly with Alexis at their small kitchen table, sharing stories about school and friends. Alexis leaned thoughtfully toward her mother, smiling softly. "Mama," she began earnestly, "do you think what we did will really last?" Jasmine took Alexis's hand, squeezing gently. "Yes, baby. Change lasts when courage becomes contagious, and that's exactly what you started." Alexis smiled brightly. "Then I'm glad we were brave together." Jasmine hugged her tightly. "Always together, sweetheart." Years later, Jasmine's courageous fight continued inspiring Oak Ridge's community. The Oversight Committee grew influential, setting standards adopted throughout the entire district. Alexis excelled academically, becoming a confident young woman deeply committed to advocacy, always remembering how bravery changed her life. On Alexis's graduation day, standing proudly in front of hundreds, she delivered an emotional speech highlighting courage, dignity, and compassion. "I learned true strength from my mother," Alexis spoke passionately. "She taught me silence should never equal safety. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about standing up despite fear. Thanks to her bravery, every student here knows their voice matters." As applause thundered through the auditorium, Jasmine stood proudly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Watching her daughter speak powerfully about courage, Jasmine knew the painful journey had been worth every difficult step. And though their fight began with a simple stolen lunch, it ended in powerful transformation, a legacy of courage, respect, and dignity. Alexis and Jasmine had forever rewritten Oak Ridge Elementary's story, proving ordinary voices, when courageous, can create extraordinary change. For Jasmine and Alexis Bennett, bravery had become more than a word. It was now their legacy, shared forever.